Your summary statement is supposed to set the tone for the interviewer to know what it is that you're trying to go for. So if you're in construction and your summary statement says a very active construction worker or something like that, that's not helping you. And then you go to your whole resume and your work experience and none of it has anything to do with software. You've given yourself no help.
For me, what I see is, folks, the path to getting the skills is very clear. But that part, the perception piece, molding it, fixing it, changing it, I think that's the difference maker. And I think that's where most people stumble. I think that's kind of the hard battle we fought, but I think we kind of agree that each person's probably weak in one area, and figuring out where that weakness is really important to kind of keep going through.
What's going on, everyone? I am Danny Thompson. I'm Director of Technology at a company called This.Labs.
And I'm Leon Noel, Managing Director of Engineering at a wonderful nonprofit called Resilient Coders.
Let's go. First time, so smooth. It's like we know what we're doing.
Oh my gosh. 10 episodes in. Let's go.
All right. Today's episode, from our very brief talk of what we think we're going to do today, I think we're going to fight.
I think so too. This is a sensitive topic.
So we're going to start with one. We're going to go, I don't know where it's going to lead us, to be honest. The topic today is, do we think front-end development is enough to get your very first job in tech? I will say my take, Leon will say his take, and we will fight. I have a feeling we differ on this one. For me, I'm not going to say I don't think anything is impossible. I don't think it's impossible to get a job front end only. I don't think it's impossible to get a job back end only. What I will say is, by being front end only in today's market, you have actually positioned yourself further away from a lot of the job opportunities. And this has to be a very conscious decision that you're making to do so. And because that you've siloed yourself in there, I've personally seen in the last 2 years a dramatic drop in the front end only opportunities. Yeah. Does it mean that they're non-existent or zero? No. Everything is different, right? I think your location and market play a very large factor in this answer as well. Because again, the biggest edge, we've said this on episodes before. Yep. I think we'll probably say this on episodes after this. Your location will always be a very strong determining factor in what advice actually works. And again, Leon Noel and Danny Thompson are giving you advice based on our experiences to the best of our abilities. We don't want to misguide anybody. Do the research and see if it applies. Yep. With that being said, I think it is very damn difficult to get a job front end only, because you're really pulling yourself away from a lot of the opportunities. And then I do know that Leon and I come from two different schools of thought, because I often think of enterprise level and he thinks of startups, and that becomes a contention point between the two of us. But when I think about who's doing the majority of hiring when it comes to junior devs, enterprise is a very large factor in this. And for them, to give you a prime example, I think I've used the same example before, and I think it's just universally known. JP Morgan Chase, they have a program that's called like the Emerging Talent Program, right? And this is just one example because they're local here in Dallas, where they hire like several hundred juniors at a time, right? And so it's like, do I want to chase after the opportunity where they hire one junior dev, maybe a year or 2 years for their 10-person team? Or do I want to go into the organization where they have thousands of developers, and by being hired, I have a higher likelihood of getting placed there? And in doing so, they guarantee your years of employment. You're on a big team, but on top of that, you're on what I call a resume builder of a company, because it has name recognition no matter where you go in the country. And so because of that, even their entry to get in there, it revolves around doing like a take-home test or a coding assessment that is in Java, right? And so, especially in Dallas, Java has a high demand, but specifically like one of their tests revolves around that. And so for me, I think it is very, very, very hard to where you've put yourself in a really strong corner that you can't break out of as easily by going front end only for your first job, at least going into 2025. That is my true belief. Leon?
I think you talk too much sense. I thought this would be a different route we would go on. Because I don't think we're too far off, right? I don't think we're too far off. I think when it comes to getting a job in this market right now, I always think about fundamentals first. I want any engineer that's going through any of the training programs I run to understand the full stack, right? Like I want them to be comfortable on the front end. I want them to be comfortable on the back end. And I think the moment you decide to say, I'm a front end developer, especially before you've ever worked in the industry, I think that's a fool's errand. I think you're setting yourself up for some bad times. And so I always think about the job search process as opening doors so opportunity can come through. And the moment you say you're a front end developer, even if that's like not all the skills you have, and that's what you're focused on to get jobs, well, you just closed a couple really big doors for opportunity to come through. And so I think anyone that's in this market should be open to any opportunity. They should be open to any type of role that would come their way. And it's silly to pigeonhole yourself, especially early in your career, when you really, like, honestly, most likely don't know what it's like to be a professional developer that works on the front end, that works on the back end, to have such strong opinions on that you're willing to kind of not interview certain places because of it. Make those decisions mid-level of your career, not at the beginning of your career. So I think if you're approaching the job search process, having an understanding across the stack and having a deep tie into fundamentals is the most important bit. And then when it comes time to getting the job and deciding whether front end, back end, whatever comes across your desk first is what you should go for and lock down. Now, you might think about, well, then what skills do I focus on? And I think that's a whole other topic that we could talk about. Like, what are the skills you need to get in that door to get into that first role? So I don't think we're too far off, but I will say something probably a little controversial is I think too many people focus on the skills, and I just don't see that as the thing that is the biggest lever that unlocks your first opportunity. And so I think that's where we kind of start to differ again.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then let's start with you on this take. What do you think is the thing that they should be focusing on if it's not the skills?
Yeah. So you need a baseline, right? Like you should be, in my opinion, somebody that can build a full stack web application that can have users, authentication, is ideally using a front end library or framework, ideally a little bit of React, because that's just kind of what's going to open you up to understanding everything. I like JavaScript as the first language, which is a whole other beast to talk about. And I want you to have built a real app. There's a couple key things I want everybody to have done before they kind of start going on the job search process. I call it the hunt. I want you to have built a full stack application. I want you to have either freelanced or volunteered to where you have real professional experience. And then I want that all to inform the answers you give while you're going on the job search process, while you're interviewing. And so you kind of need that baseline. And then I want you to kind of figure out what your local environment is asking of you. Do you need the Java? Do you need the Python? Get a tutorial or two underneath your belt. Build another app that increases your current skill set to include that local skill set, right? So you have the baseline of skills. And then most of your effort should be, all right, how do I actually get my foot in the door? Right now, clicking apply does not work. Of course, there's going to be some random outlier. When they click apply, they get lucky, the magic happens. Right now, there's a couple really big things gunking up the works from the recruiters I talk to. One, you have a glut of folks that are applying. A lot of folks are using AI tools to apply. So the normal mechanisms that they have to have candidates come their way are fundamentally changing, and it's kind of all out of whack. And so, all right, well, how do I get in front of these folks that can make the hiring decision? And that's networking your way in. And so if I have a student that has a baseline of skill, and then they're like, Leon, should I be focusing on studying my full stack skills for 6 hours a day, or networking, and we call it hit listing, for 6 hours a day? I'm always going to say, make the connections, get your foot in the door by talking to real humans, so you can skip this line that is fundamentally broken at the moment and get yourself into actual folks that can talk to you, that you can explain your resume to, that you can explain your experience to. And we could talk about how to do that. But that's kind of my way, I think, about what you should be focusing on.
Yeah, I agree with you about like 50%.
Yeah.
And I think we kind of knew that.
Yep.
But it's not as bad as what I thought.
Yeah, same.
At least at the beginning. I thought I was about to cuss and everything on this episode. So I'll say where I agree with you. I think we've already done an episode on this. I believe it's already come out of where we think like the hiring process is broken, right? And there's definitely a lot that is, but there are other areas where it isn't. And so you have to play the game the right way. I think, if I'm being honest, I still think skills matter tremendously. And you can't do yourself a disservice by not focusing on it. And the reason why is you could be the best soft skill person in the world, and that gets you into the interview. But if you don't have the skills to showcase when you're in there, it put you in a position where now you're just kind of making a fool out of yourself. And it becomes one of those moments where in the shower, you're like, damn, why didn't I do that better? And then a month later, you're still in that same shower, like, damn, why didn't I do this? All that regret that can be built up because you neglected skill. Now, I'll be honest. I've only ever had one interview in my life that wasn't a technical interview as far as like data structures and algorithms. Yeah. I've talked to many people where they've had multiple interviews that they've never had. I think it depends on the company that you're targeting. But you can have the best soft skills in the world and network and develop all these things around you to kind of get you in these conversations. But eventually that conversation is going to progress to a point where you have to be able to prove your skill set. I don't care what organization it is, there's some remnants of something where you showcase that you're technical, right? Whether it's DSA, whiteboarding, whether it's pair programming, where it's building a coding take-home assessment test, or whether it's building a take-home project, there's something there where you have to be able to prove your technical abilities. By skipping on the skills in the technical sense, you're doing yourself a disservice. Will there be outliers that have an opportunity where it's like, you know what? I completely am the worst developer in the world. I can't even do a for loop correctly, but I got the job in tech. Sure. But for the vast majority, I would say it's really important that you invest enough time to where you're able to talk about yourself technically and it doesn't sound like you're making it up on the spot. That's the one interesting thing about tech. It's because there are multiple ways to solve a problem, but they all involve some form of logic that a developer would be able to pinpoint. Yeah. As you start trying to make it up, it becomes very obvious that you don't know what you're talking about. And I have literally been in interviews where I'm on the deciding team with my coworkers, and we've seen someone basically making it up, but they don't want to admit that they don't know something. Yeah. And because of that approach, it just digs their grave so much deeper for them. And so if you're in that situation, I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, I actually don't know the answer to this, but if given enough time to research it, I'll find out. I'll come back with the right information and be able to do this. And I know interviewers personally that will be like, that was the right answer to use at that time. But there's only so many times you can use that answer before they're like, oh, this person doesn't actually know anything. And so then it becomes like, and that's the thing that I always say, there's only so many no's before it's like, oh, this person doesn't know what I need. So instead of saying no, sometimes I want to kind of counteract that with, for example, if I'm going for a Java role, but in the reality, I only know .NET. They'll be like, well, do you know Java? I'll be like, no, I know .NET. That's not great. But if I were to be something along the lines of, I actually don't utilize Java in my day-to-day, but I am familiar with some of the concepts, and given enough time and onboarding time, I'll be able to adopt that technology since I have a background in .NET. That works. But even then, there's so many times where I can go with that where they're like, oh, you just don't know what's required for this role. And so you got to play that game properly. And so I always come back to calling it a game because in hiring, it really is. Especially now more than ever, dude.
So do you focus on the game or do you focus on the skills?
But if you know how to play the game, the only way you're going to excel the leaderboard is by having the skills that they're going to be looking for when you're playing the game. So I think you have to do both. And, I've said this for years. I don't know why this just popped in my head. Interviewing skills and programming skills are not the same. I look at them as parallels because you can learn a program. That doesn't mean you're ready for an interview. And you can learn how to interview. It doesn't mean you're ready to program. And there's a point around interview number 3 or 4 where they intersect finally. And so that's when both colliding, you need them both together. And so neglecting one only does yourself a disservice.
So the funny thing is, I think we're saying exactly the same thing.
Really?
I do. I just think our stopping points are at different places.
Okay.
Right. So I think and this I think could lead like to a whole discussion around like the things that junior engineers, or I don't like to use the word junior, I like to use entry level engineers hyper focus on, or the things that will help them or not help them long term in their career. But I think there's a point to where we have to recognize that someone that's going through an interview process only has so much time, and what are the like optimizations they're willing to make as they're going through that process. So I'm with you. They need skills. I don't think that's my argument. I think that I'm trying to speak to the psychology of an entry-level person that's been learning and needs to do the things that are going to actually help them get the job. And you typically have two camps. You have like the code weenies that are just going to keep doing more tutorials, keep building more projects, and avoid the work that is the social game to get the job. And then you'll have some folks that are really just off the rip good at the social game, and they ignore maybe developing their skill set a little bit more so that more interviews go their way. And so then it's kind of like finding where that sweet spot is. And so for me, with the data that I have, and this is why I can feel the angry emails coming my way. About 50% of the interviews that my folks see are not technical. Doesn't mean that it's not technical in nature, is that they're not doing necessarily like a full-blown coding challenge. They're having conversations, right? They're talking about their past work. They're going deep on a particular bit of code that they've written. They're having a conversation with different members of the team. And a lot of times that's it. And so if that person then does leak code until their eyeballs fall out, well, they're never getting through that interview process, even though they did all these things that were optimal for the interview game. And then you could have someone that didn't build a full project, doesn't have up-to-date things in their portfolio, that even if their interview game is great, they don't have anything to talk about. And in those interviews, they're going to fail. And so I think it's about recognizing where you are at on your journey, right? And what are the things that you need to do to play the game optimally. And the only way to do that, I think, is to get in the game and see where you keep messing up. So if you're getting to interviews and each time you go to an interview, you're like, dang, I don't have any projects to talk about. I don't know how to talk about the things that happen. Well, guess what? Time to focus on more projects. Or if you're getting into interviews and you feel like you have the skills, but you can't communicate them, well, guess what? It's time to start practicing those behavioral questions. It's time to start practicing those technical questions. And so I think each person might be a slightly different like stopping point on that scale. And you have to realize where you are and then get in the game so you can figure out what you need to fix.
Yeah, I call that the ammunition to win the war because at the end of the day, these conversations are basically battles each time. And so some you're going to win, some you're going to lose. But the way that I really like to look at it is if you know that you have not done enough to give yourself enough ammunition to win those conversations, it's time to get to work, right? And so even like today, this morning, I had several hours. And so I was like, what can I do that would be like impactful for this Saturday morning? And I was like, you know what? Let me tweet out, I'm going to do resume reviews, right? And, you know, as much as I talked about LinkedIn and resumes and as many resumes as I fix, I always get shocked at some of the ones that I see. And today specifically was a big shock because I see these juniors that are trying to break in. They don't even have projects. Like they're listing the weather app on their projects, right? And so it's like, to me, there's some projects that you build to learn from, and they're phenomenal projects for that. And then there are other projects that you showcase in an interview, and those projects are not the same. And so for me, the weather app is like the first time you learn how to use an API. That's the way that I look at it. You apply to get an API key, you got it. That's the first time you're using an API in a JavaScript project. That is the way that I view it. There's no way on God's green earth I would walk into an interview showcasing that because it just screams you're a beginner and you're not.
But wait a minute. I built a calculator that converts it from Fahrenheit to Celsius. And that's on the portfolio too. So be careful now. Like,
I had a very angry LinkedIn comment say something very similar, like, why can't I just get a job with the calculator app? It's an app that is on every single device in the world. People use it all the time. This is a professional app. And we were arguing back and forth, and he finally said that as his last comment. And I said, one word reply, perception. And that ended the whole conversation, because that is what this comes down to. It is the perception of what you're able to bring to the conversation and the table. And so you can argue the semantics however you want. You're obviously not playing the game correctly if you try to argue it that way, in my opinion. But perception is a big deal here. And so if you're perceived, or as you've said in previous episodes, the smell test, and you don't pass it because of that, that is that perception right there. And so I don't know. I think there are certain projects you should do. But I'll say this. If you look at your resume and you're applying to a software developer position, and the only thing that is software developer related to your resume is the job that you're applying for and nothing on your resume, you're doing it wrong. And so it's like your summary statement is talking about everything that you're currently doing. It's positioning you. And that's like, people forget about that. Your summary statement is supposed to set the tone for the interviewer to know what it is that you're trying to go for. So if you're in construction and your summary statement says a very active construction worker or something like that, that's not helping you.
Yeah.
And then you go to your whole resume and your work experience and none of it has anything to do with software. You've given yourself no help.
Yeah. And I think that's the game, right? And I think for me, what I see is, folks, the path to getting the skills is very clear. Go do free code camp. You'll get them, right? Like you could go do 100 devs. You'll get there, right? But that part, the perception piece, molding it, fixing it, changing it, I think that's the difference maker. And I think that's where most people stumble. People coming out of 100 devs, we study the bank. It's 300 technical questions that we have off the dome. We use EU, explanation, use, example, tying it into real code that we've seen. We go into those interviews and we know what we're talking about because we prepared. And so the perception is high, right? And so then once we get our foot in through, then our skills can shine through, which is, I think, is really interesting. And so I think that's kind of the hard battle we fought. But I think we kind of agree that each person's probably weak in one area, and figuring out where that weakness is really important to kind of keep going through. I kind of like what you're talking about, kind of entry level folks, like kind of where they're messing up, I guess, I think could be fun to kind of run with. And I think maybe like in the application process is one thing, but maybe they've gotten the job, and maybe we could spend some time. Like, what are some of the most common things we see folks that got their first job? How are they messing up? How could they improve? Or like, what should they be mindful of? What are the things that maybe they're not seeing as they're going into it? I feel like that could be something we could.
Yeah, let's run with that topic. I would say before we do, let's give a quick shout out to our sponsors today. Us. We are
on the
sponsor. Yeah, we don't have a sponsor, so if you want to sponsor the episode, let us know. We don't even, I'll be honest, we haven't figured that part out yet. We're just kind of just having a good time. But what I will say is, if you're enjoying this episode, please, I ask for you to follow it wherever it is that you follow this stuff at. Rate it, please. That really helps us out a lot. And the only thing that I can say is, if you do that, we will keep running our mouths on this thing for you, and we will do everything within our power to make it a great episode. So we'll figure out all those details when it comes to, but we definitely put our effort into this. So I'm really happy with the way it's been going so far.
And the best part has been like the little messages we get on Twitter and the email that like, hey, I applied that advice. It helped. Like literally someone took our advice on the interview process, applied it, and did well during their interviews. And so that follow seems very little, but if it gets one more person to hear that advice and it changes their job search process, that's huge. So we really appreciate it, and I know that it's doing good when you do it as well.
Yeah, I will say it's been really cool to see and we saw this even at the conference with some of the people that listened, they were there, but like they show me like their Thursday morning start because they know the podcast will be out on their way to work. I love that. And so if there's ways that we can help on there, I think that's great. But honestly, I think we're at least for me, I'm very big on honoring time. And so I feel like every single week when we come in here, we're really with that mindset of like, how can we make sure someone's walking away, if not with one gem, but like 10 or 15. And so I think this episode will be no shorter than that. But without going in long spiel, sorry, y'all.
No,
please.
It means a lot to us. Like, I think we got it, since we don't have like this could have been a sponsor spot. It's not a sponsor spot. This is us just making an appeal to you, the listener, that say, hey, like, this stuff matters and we appreciate it.
Yeah. So we said that we're going to talk about mistakes that we see juniors make. There's one that immediately came to my mind as I'm thinking about this. And to be honest, like, I'm even thinking of some now, like at a senior level, that I see people make. But juniors, the biggest one that I think I see them make, and it sounds so weird when you say it, they don't even read the error message.
Oh, no.
And you want to know how I know that this is a mistake juniors make? Because I made the exact same message, a mistake every single time. Where it's like, you're doing something code related, you get especially in like VS Code, or if you're using like JetBrains, you'll see that red error message pop up, and you're like, I don't know what's going wrong. And like, you don't even read it. You're just thinking like, man, something's wrong here, and I don't know what it is. And I remember I had someone who I reference a lot because I really love this human being. He's retired now, but his name was Mark Gibbons. And he worked with me on my first job in tech, and wealth of experience. Like, it was incredible how much knowledge he had. And I remember I had something go wrong, and I was like, man, I don't know what's going wrong. He's like, well, did you read the error message? I was like, well, I Googled it. He's like, oh, that's cool, but did you read it? And I was like, no, I just like copied and pasted and Googled it. And he's like, don't you think that's kind of foolish? I was like, well, when you say it like that, I mean, yeah, then. But that's a big mistake that juniors make. They just know an error is there, and instead of taking the time to think about it, they're just like, copy paste, throw it in ChatGPT, throw it in Google, find out why. But the reality is, if you read that error and try to debug it yourself, you're going to learn a lot in that process anyway. But at least you'll know what's going on wrong.
Yeah. I think though my first came to mind one, which is I think kind of also a meme at this point, is just read the docs. Yeah. Just read the docs. Especially when you're joining an org for the first time, they should have some internal documentation that you should read through, right? Style guides, whatever they have for you, you should just, in those first month or so, just voraciously consume that content. But the number of times I have gone down a rabbit hole, spend an afternoon Googling and reading Stack Overflow to just have eventually find myself full circle back at the docs, reading through like, oh, and it builds like that mental model of how it's supposed to flow and work. And then I can actually approach the problem with like an actual understanding of the tool that I'm using is way too damn high. And so I would say like whatever tools, when you join an org that you see them using, take some time to learn those tools, take some time to, if they have docs, read through the docs, even if it's just like once or twice to get that full overview. I think it'll just set you up for that first kind of 3 to 6 month span in a really good way.
You know, you just reminded me of one too, which, by the way, very good point on the docs. But the one thing that I was thinking of as you were speaking, so many developers, especially they just got onboarded or they're new in the industry, they're so focused on being syntax pushers instead of problem solvers. And I think the mindset on those is so different, because if you're a syntax pusher, if I give you a ticket and you're only focused on solving that ticket, you don't think about how this scales, how this does well, how it interacts with other parts of the code base, you end up getting it sent back from QA. You end up getting it sent back from your code review. And now you have all this additional work. And I think because of that, you're not thinking with everything combined or all the things that it interact with. The problem is very mediocre or less than average that you're trying to solve. And so I think when you start thinking about bigger picture and you start developing better solutions, you become way more marketable within your organization. But that's when you start becoming a very strong developer and more marketable to the industry as a whole. Yeah. So I think getting outside of that mindset of a syntax pusher and start becoming a stronger problem solver. I
love that. I also, you kind of hinted on like this other thing that like just popped in my brain too, of getting like the bigger picture too, like of what you're building and working through. And you also mentioned you're like the person that helped you out in the beginning that had all this wealth of knowledge. one of your first big conversations I think is really worthwhile to have is to sit down with someone senior on the team and be like, how does it all come together? What's the magic? Like what from beginning to end, just walk me through it once. It'll take 2 hours. I promise I'll document the whole conversation. I'll never ask this question again, but like, how does it work? And all those little hidden things that aren't written down probably they're just things that are just part of their everyday pattern. Having them explain that to you all the way through can be really big in the beginning.
Oh yeah. And what's funny is, I don't know if this is even a mistake, but I will say that I think it's really important to remind the seniors on your team that, hey, I don't have, and this is probably a senior mistake, actually, now that I think about it, thinking that your juniors know everything that you know. Because I can tell you right now, I remember being in multiple meetings with seniors where they would say something, and it was me and another junior at the time. We were both juniors on the same team. And I remember very vocally always saying, I don't have a clue what that is. I have no context of what we're talking about. But he would stay quiet, the other junior. And so after a while, he started getting vocal too, because obviously, he realized he doesn't burst into flames or whatever. But I remember the senior on the team, he was like, you don't know that? I was like, how could I know that? I've only been here 2 months. I've only been here a month. So no, I don't know that. And then he's like, oh, yeah. And then he go explain it. I think some juniors are so afraid to admit that they'll just be like, oh, okay, they'll write it down. And not like, what the hell does that even mean? Where for 5 seconds, if you just said, hey, I have no context on this, can you explain what this is? That would clear up so much of additional work that you try to sound smart in the same room. I think that's a mistake that seniors make, but also but I don't think it's a junior mistake because you just don't know.
Yeah.
But it's definitely a senior mistake, taking for granted what people know on your team.
And I like the flip side of that too is like, I think when we first mentioned this topic, one of the things I think is most important is that, especially what you're bringing up, entry level folks don't ask questions. It's just a lot of folks have this fear of asking questions. One of the strategies I've coached people on is to go to your team and just say, hey, is it okay for me to ask questions for the next 2 months? And it sounds silly, but you getting that permission takes this magical weight off of your shoulders that you may or may not think is there, but it does. It gives you the freedom, gives you the grace to be like, hey, remember I said I was going to ask questions. I'm going to write everything down. I'll build good docs. Anybody that comes on the team after won't ask it. I'll never ask the same question twice, but I need to know that I can come to you with the silliest of questions, and that's going to be okay in the first 1 to 3 months as I onboard. And most teams that have good people, I'm like, yeah, sure, cool, ask us the questions. And then you don't have that fear, right? And I think the biggest mistake I made in my career, I think like the biggest mistake, especially early in my career, was being afraid to ask questions because I felt I'd be perceived as less than, dumb, not knowing what I was talking about, especially when this company just made this decision to hire me or to bring me on board. They've like put their trust in me, and I come in and I say, how does this like thing that you use every day, what does that mean? What is it actually like? How does that work? And I think that fear stops so much growth. I know people that have lost their jobs because of that fear. Mm-hmm. They just can't get out of it and ask the question. And so do what you can to ask the questions and get unstuck, because if you don't, you're going to lose your job.
Yeah. I'll be honest, on the losing jobs part, 100% agree. I actually know somebody who lost their job because of that. I also, I do like these one-on-one calls. And so I did a one-on-one call. To be honest, I don't really love doing them, but I know it helps people, but it takes up too much time. But I remember one call that we did specifically was with somebody. They were a software developer at a company, junior level still. 2 years in, they're still a junior. And then I remember getting on this call, and they're like, I'm afraid that I'm about to lose my job. And they've given me like this task to where they're like, this is going to be the task that makes or breaks whether we keep you here or not. And they're freaking out because they're intimidated. And as I'm talking to this person, it becomes very obvious why they're at this point, right? Like, they got by for a long time, new manager's like, wait, can you actually code? Like, what's going on here? The other managers kind of ignored it all, right? That's a bad manager, in my opinion, because they never checked on their dev to help them out, give resource, none of that. And so they got by for a little while. One thing that became interesting was this person was so terrified of asking for help or asking for clarity or questions that they, in this task that's their make or break for their job, they still have unclear goals of what they need to do. And I was like, the first thing you need to do tomorrow morning is go have a conversation with them to figure out what needs to be clear here for you. Because if you can't execute, that's a big issue. So like poor communication, I think, is a big thing here. But also another thing that I say is like avoiding ownership of like their stuff. So it's like, for me, any company that I've ever worked at, there's always one thing where it's like, oh, you need help with Danny's the guy. Oh, you need this to be clear. Go head up, Danny. I always try to find one area of the code base where that's me, right? And so at my previous company, anything that dealt with the checkout process or specifically like loyalty, I was the person you could turn to. I know every component in there. I built out this like sister store feature. I could explain everything to you. So it's like, if a product is out of stock someplace and you want to check if another store has it, like I built out that whole logic. Or something that I'm super proud of that it's now public, so I could say it. At AutoZone.com, when you land on there, there's like a scrolling thing of products, right? I still geek out over hover effects. I love that stuff. And so as you go over this thing, there are like different products in there, which like they tailor based on what's on sale, but maybe they also have some data on like a signed in user. They know what they're looking for, so they try to present it there. Super complex. God, on the back end, it was crazy. But I'm super proud of that. Anything that had to deal with that, they're like, go talk to Danny. Oh, this broke this? Go talk to Danny. So if you're working on something, you need to figure out what that is for you. And so by taking ownership of that, you become not just the key person to talk to, but they also start admiring you for that knowledge that you have in that regard. And so that's how you really start building your place out in organizations.
I love that. And you don't have to start big either, right? Like there are so many pieces, especially early on, especially when you're new to a team and you're fresh to the environment, how things get set up, how things get updated. You got some NPM package that's older than I am, right? Like there are so many things you can like take ownership of early on. I love that. And then over time, more and more can come into your domain. It's really hard to fire someone that's your go-to person, you know?
Exactly. And you know what's funny is I wasn't even thinking about this. There's a guy that I worked with. I still talk to him regularly, and we worked at a company, and he was like the knowledge holder, right? And so they wouldn't promote him on position, but they kept giving him raises. Like they were like, we just can't give you the title change because if we do, what comes with that is you end up leaving this department, and we can't have that happen because you just know someone. So for him, his knowledge was a hindrance because it was so isolated. And so I think once you get to like the L4, L5 level, you need to be more flexible, moldable, and teachable to people, like an effective leader and teacher. Because if you're at an L5 level and you're not passing down some of this knowledge to your, like, I don't want to say lower level, but your earlier seniors, you're doing yourself a disservice anyway. But, and you know what's another mistake seniors make? And this just popped in my head because of what I'm thinking about. Your decisions lack a lot of business context, but you're still making those decisions. So it's like you're only really taking in one part of the equation. And at a senior level, juniors, I expect that. But at a senior level, I'm thinking, hey, we're working on this newsletter feature. We know all the context go to like our customer service team and our newsletter team and stuff like that. But by doing this, it's going to break it. You haven't even considered by implementing this new feature, how it's going to affect these other teams. I would be thinking how they interact with the data to ensure that whatever it is that I'm doing, it either keeps things the same or it enhances it, but not degrades it. And so if I'm doing something that diminishes what they're dealing with, that's a bad business context decision that I'm making. And I know the first pushback that I'm going to get is, oh, well, this is something that the project manager should think about. Yes, but whose responsibility is it to question this at the backlog refinement sessions?
Yeah.
It's yours.
That's what we needed to do a whole other episode on like mid and senior, and I think that could be really fun. I'd
have to take some time to really think about it. All this is
sure.
just coming to me in the moment. Let's do a question. We didn't do a question for the last episode, so let's do a question.
We're already at 38 minutes. What happened? I feel like we just started. I'm not going to lie. I feel like we just started hit record. That's wild.
That's the problem. Like, that's why we keep getting to these long episodes.
I got like 10 other things that are on my mind that I want to talk about.
We got to do another episode.
Let's do a question for sure. That's an interesting one. What is the average? This is the question that came in. What is the average wait time? Recruiter is not responding. I spoke to a recruiter phone screen right before the holidays, but have not heard back.
Dang, that's a good question, and I don't even know if I have like the best answer for that one. I'd say it depends. Like, I don't think there's like a national standard of if you don't hear back in 36 hours. No, I do it. But to be honest, if I'm job searching, I don't actually have enough time on my plate to count their time. And I think if you're only solely focused on one recruiter reaching back out to you, you might be doing something wrong here.
Yeah.
And you're putting all your eggs in one basket. I can tell you right now, generally speaking, and this is probably not a recruiter-friendly answer. Now that I'm thinking, I realized I'm away from the mic. It's not a recruiter-friendly answer, but I will pit 5 to 10 recruiters against each other. I have them all working for me. And so I'll tell them all, like, you're my only one. But the reality is, it's like, get to work and get me a job, get me an interviews. Yeah. And so it's very hard for me to just sit there and think like, why is one recruiter not contacting me? Because generally when I'm trying to job search, I'm like looking at multiple interviews at a time, multiple conversations. I'm not just putting all my eggs in one basket and just praying this one person does right by me. Because I've said this before, I think, on the podcast, the only way they monetize that relationship is if they can get you in a seat. And if they can't, what they end up doing is ghosting you. And it's unfortunate. It sucks. But I can tell you, I spoke to like many recruiters at this point, thousands. But one conversation I had with a recruiter that worked at Uber, and I said, you know, how many conversations are you getting to on a weekly basis? They said on an average week, 400. They don't have time to coddle you and talk to you, especially if things aren't going to be monetized, right? Now, if you're still in the running, different conversation. And so I think that's also a reason why commonplace now is for them not to give feedback after interviews. It's obviously, company liability and whatnot, which sucks because that feedback will only make you a better person and candidate. But it's unfortunate, but it's true. But they don't. And so I don't think there's an average wait time. I would just be getting as many interviews as you possible and as many conversations as possible. You should be having conversations. To be honest, like if you look at my schedule on a daily basis now, I'm getting in conversations with people that I know can't turn into anything. I'm getting conversation with people that can turn into something. I'm having conversation with my devs to where it's like, hey, let's go over this and kind of reiterate over this. Even if I feel like it's fruitful, it's not fruitful, or if there's context and no context, or maybe I need to build business context in them so that way they understand how to develop this feature properly. These are things that if you look at my schedule, that's where it's at. Yeah. All of it may not necessarily be beneficial to me, but it could be beneficial to the other party. And so when I look at recruiters, it may not necessarily be beneficial to them to get on a call with me when then nothing can be monetized. But if I could try and build that conversation, I want to. And the other thing that you should be thinking of is there's a possibility this conversation doesn't go positive for me. That's fine. How do I turn it into where it's like, hey, you'll forget about me for the next 6 months, but after 6 months, can we recycle me? And I can tell you, I've had more positive things come my direction because of that. And so I'll end up on this point. I remember one conversation with somebody where they were literally getting mad and they were in my DMs like, look at this. And they sent me a screenshot of the message. They're a MERN stack developer and they came in with a Java position because, you know, recruiters are recruiters. And so they said, I can't believe this person came out to me. They know I don't work in Java, even though I work in JavaScript on the front end, la da da da. And I was like, why are you mad? Like, you should be happy that you even ended up in the search. Like you matched something to be there, so you're doing something right. So what I often do in those circumstances is say, hey, I'm not actually a match for ABC, but I am a match for DEF. And so here's my resume. If you have anything that comes across your desk that matches that, I would love to be put in consideration at the top of the conversation. Do you know how many times that positive reaction has yielded great conversations?
I
think about how you use that.
I think oh man, there's so much gold in that answer. It was such a good freaking answer. Like, listen to this. Like, you don't get this. Like, I don't understand. Like, please listen to what Danny just said. There's so many big facts in there. And one of the things I really liked is that you kind of spoke to the psychology of what it's like to go. And I'm thinking a lot about that. This episode is like what it's like to go through this experience of getting the job. And there's this idea of not riding the highs and the lows, right? And so you kind of picked up on that this person might be hyper focusing on the fact that a recruiter is giving them any attention at all. And they're putting all their eggs into this basket. The emotions are high. And if it doesn't go well, the emotions are going to get real low. And when you're on the job search, you got to be even keel. It's I call it 1 out of 60. It doesn't matter. It's like you got to keep your numbers up so that those opportunities can come your way. And when you're just hyper focusing on one response, or good or bad, it's setting you up to just be on this roller coaster that's not going to be fun. And so understanding that idea of like, yes, okay, recruiter gets back to me, doesn't get back to me, doesn't impact my ability to keep moving forward. And then there are so many other pieces to hear that you said too, which is like this idea when a recruiter is in contact with you, you've done something right. Like I have my favorite thing. It's similar to what you said. I have this email that I just have queued up. That's, hey, I really appreciate you reaching out. I'm not looking for anything right now. Here's my dream list. Here's like the things that would, sorry, Ayana, if you listen to this, here's the thing that would make my boss, that would make me move, right? Here are like the things that make me move. If you have something that's in this ballpark, happy to talk. If not a great fit, I understand, but I really appreciate you reaching out. And I send that to every recruiter that hits my inbox. And the number of people that come back is kind of shocking. You respond positively, the positivity comes back. So I really like that you mentioned that. And then the idea of like the average wait time, because they did say, what's the average wait time? It's all over the place. I have somebody in 100 devs that 6 months after they were talking to the recruiter, came back and gave them an offer. 6 months had gone by and they're like, hey, perfect time right now. Here's your offer letter. Like nothing, like it hadn't been 6 months. So sometimes we're worried about a weak reply. It's all over the place. The one thing I will say is that you should have some sort of system to where you're following up with people. I like to use a technique that's kind of like spaced repetition, to where I'll follow up at one point, and then a certain number of days later, I'll follow up again. A certain number of days, I'll follow up again. But it's the same process for every person. So I'm not like putting energy into it. It's just the thing that I do for each type of response. And then I have my breakup email, which is like hey, I haven't heard back from you in the next amount of time. And it's like, here are 3 numbers. 1 is, I hate your guts and never want to talk to you again. 2 is, I'm just really busy. I would love to connect. And 3 is like, here's my calendar, book a time. And I send that breakup email. And the number of people that just hit a number and respond is also really high. And so just having some sort of process, knowing that it can be different for every recruiter, but on you to follow up, on you to kind of keep the ball in play, on you to kind of keep the positivity. So many things I think that go into that one question that we could have a whole probably episode on.
See, this is why I kind of love doing this with you, because I don't have like finesse in this, right? Like I'm just blurting what's in my brain, and you have this way to like refine my ideas so that way it sounds great. I love that balance. I swear. I need to work on that more, but
I just yap too much. It's the streaming.
To be honest, that's what we do, dude. Like we keep getting told to do shorter episodes, and we keep going over the dang time.
As we're 50 minutes in.
What's funny is, for those that don't know, like before this was like, all right, we're gonna keep it at 34 minutes this time for sure. We keep getting in trouble. Oh, it's so funny. All right. Anyway, love doing this episode today. Hopefully this will give a lot of context that helps some people. I think it's going to give a lot of ideas. Yeah. If there is something that you want to see on the episode, please send us an email, DannyandLeonspodcast@gmail.com. Your question may end up becoming a question that we ask at the end of the episode, or we may end up doing a whole episode on it.
Questions. That'll be fun.
We've gotten some real good ones that's kind of guided us. Heck, I mean, part of the reason why we came up with some of this was we tweeted it out and we got some good responses. But to be honest, I mean, inspiration can come from anywhere. And if we think we can help people, that might be the question that we want to tackle that time. So if you haven't already, check us out on the socials. Check us out pretty much anywhere that you get a podcast. You can listen to it. Of course, the YouTube channel, please show some love. The episodes are also put there. But obviously, wherever you're listening to this, if it's via audio, please do so. It helps us out as well. But outside of that, y'all, it's been real. It's been fun. It's been real fun. And I'll see you on the next one. Peace. Bye, everybody.